Furiosa came out on last Thursday, and so far has earned 35 million domestic, 67.8 million worldwide. This is more telling than it is interesting, because I think for the most part, Furiosa as a film has gotten good reviews by critics and by audiences. I think personally, I felt like the action was fun. I felt like, though it was too damn long. And I have a theory about that, but I'm curious. The overall love for the film versus the actual box office is quite telling. What were your thoughts about the film, and what are your thoughts about the box office over the weekend?
Well, I was trying to get in to see the film, but unfortunately, I had a bunch of interviews and pitches over the last weekend and week, so I haven't checked it out. However, I do know a great deal about George Miller. I have some friends that know him personally. I've got to make that connection myself. I'm trying to, but it's hard. I think one of the things that kind of hurt this is the marketing, and the first part being the title. Furiosa would have been fine, but adding a Mad Max story tends to be false advertising, because
it's a reminder of what the movie's not.
Exactly. And the thing is that Mad Max is a legend of sorts. George Miller said shortly after, I think, Road Warrior leading up to Beyond Thunderdome, is that even though Mel Gibson is playing the character in those movies, from the perspective of the people telling the stories, because they're all, except for the first one, they're all told in the past. Like in the Road Warrior, the kid with the boomerang is actually an old man who's telling the story, and we're hearing his voiceover of what's going on with this Max and this adventure that happened. And then Beyond Thunderdome is the children in the valley recounting their story of interacting with this guy that's known as Max. The concept for them is that it may have been a different guy named Max who's helped them, but we as the audience are seeing it as one story, because it's an amalgamation of all these stories told as once. And that was the fun part, because all the worlds are different in every single Mad Max story. There's some similarities, but there's more extremes in regards to the apocalypse that Mad Max is set in. And Fury Road just really amped it up, huge. But the stories are, aside from the first Mad Max, all the other Mad Max stories aren't really about Mad Max. They're about the places he goes and the people he interacts with there. And Fury Road was one of them. And a lot of people complained, and justifiably so, that, no Mel Gibson and Tom Hardy was okay. And, I thought the plot was bad because they were just driving out and then to turn around and drive back. It's like, if you guys, kids in the back, don't calm down, I'm turning this car around. That is literally Fury Road.
And I don't remember him having necessarily a character arc.
No,
I just saw him as a guy going through hell and coming out on top in the end.
Yeah, because like the Man with No Name has more of a character arc in the Fistful of Dollars trilogy. Mad Max, he's a facilitator. He's this guy that kind of does things, but the story is really the setting and those characters there in each and every movie. It's part of this anthology approach. I think the fact that George Miller, for some reason, decided to add a Mad Max story to Furiosa is what's causing a lot of people to be apprehensive of watching it, because you're essentially saying it's a Mad Max story, but it's about Furiosa before Mad Max meets Furiosa. It's like, no, just sell us on Furiosa. Try it that way, and because again, this is what he's doing. He has actually picked one setting that he really liked recently with the Fury Road, and he's doing another movie in that setting, which he's never done before with Mad Max. We've never gone back to the village and the Road Warrior. We've never gone back to the village of Thunderdome, but this is the first time we were going back to this world. So there's something to it there that George Miller really, really liked.
Yeah,
and
I mean, I'll definitely say that the world building in this one is that I think that's what intrigued me more about Furiosa than about Fury Road. That I'm getting a sense of this world, who the players are, and it makes more sense when you go into Fury Road, the motivations of these certain factions.
I saw Robert Meyer Burnett retweeted somebody who did an analysis on this, and he basically said Furiosa shouldn't be its own standalone movie. It should be a complementary film to Fury Road, like how the Animatrix was to the Matrix trilogy.
Yeah,
like that's how it should have been.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'll say it. To me, it was a very good prequel. It's probably one of the better prequels. As much as we hate prequels, this is probably one of the better ones. and only because it does lead into the next movie without feeling forced. When Furiosa and Fury Road was hoping to find was the quest was to find the green, the find the world of abundance, and in that movie it was kind of this dream, this legend. But in this movie, you actually feel that you actually see the real place, that this was an actual location, and that Furiosa's journey was to basically return to Eden, and that was her lifelong journey. And I kind of like that. Um, Let me ask you this question though, and then I'll give you my theory as to why Furiosa and films like it aren't working. But what's striking and what's telling about Furiosa and The Fall Guy is that word of mouth is not working anymore. Because you have two ostensibly good movies with good buzz, but that buzz is not drawing people back into theaters. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's actually antithetical to what you need in marketing, because marketing is the entire purpose of marketing is to get people to talk about it, which is dependent on word of mouth, because that is the best form of getting people into the theater or getting people to buy or do anything is word of mouth. So the fact that we've had I guess a decade of movies that were mixed and underperformed and also kind of hoodwinked audiences has created a pattern to basically be very cautious about how reliable word of mouth can be these days. Because there's tons of word of mouth with Star Wars The Force Awakens, but I didn't see it in theaters because I hated J.J. Abrams. And when I did finally see it, I'm like, this is terrible. How did this make, $2 billion on the box office? But again, it comes down to word of mouth, and word of mouth allows for you to get your first opening box office weekend, but it's now up to the product to make people want to come back and see it again.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
I think
oh, go ahead.
yeah, I'll just say, I think it's been really hard with the way Hollywood has been producing these tentpole films to focus on the repeat viewing aspect of it. Sometimes things are so on the nose and so direct that you get it in one watch and you're like, oh, okay. And then there's no substance to it. There's nothing else there to make you think or want to go back and see again, or maybe be like, oh, people were laughing at that part, but it was funny and I didn't quite get all of it. So I really enjoyed it. So I want to go back and see it again. So maybe I can catch what was said there. So I don't have to wait for it to, back in the day, wait for it on video, but now it's streaming. And then studios are rushing to the streaming platform because they think that's where the audience is nowadays.
Yeah. Well, I'll also say, look, you're a member of WGA, so you're included in this thought. But the strike, both strikes, as much as it was about you guys and the studios fighting over it, it's the audience that I think, even it happens with every strike. The audience is just fed up with these entities fighting amongst themselves, and the audience just watching it and realizing that maybe the products that they're fighting over is not that good, and not and because what has been post strike, after Barbie and Oppenheimer, what was the big hit? And it feels like everything that came out after Oppenheimer and Barbie just underperformed and it just hasn't recovered. And I think the audiences kind of resent the WGA, SAG, and the producers for putting us into this position.
Well, there's a couple of factors in there. The first one is that there's not enough elapsed time has come for there to be put into production a post-strike film. Like everything else is just picked up where it left off, right? Because we struck for 7 months.
But even the films that were done before the strike underperformed. I mean, I'm drawing the line at July when Oppenheimer came out. And then after that, you still had movies coming out, but they all underperformed.
They all underperformed. And this goes back to the 2007 strike, which is that for some strange reason, the representatives of the WGA don't know how to market their own strike properly, because they always focus on the money. And while that's an important part and definitely a motivator, the real problem was that they didn't convey the fact that in the 07 strike was about web streaming and the new medium delivery system of content to users, and how the studios were trying to cut corners and circumvent pay across the board to pump out weaker quality content, and by way of, because reality TV had started taking off, and that was what really drew audiences in, and that's where the market kind of leaned towards. So It's a very reciprocal relationship. Whatever the audience starts gravitating towards, the market will gear towards. Even if it's a fad, which reality TV is to a degree, the market will hold on to it and try to exploit that and stretch it out as long as they could, because it's considered easier money than the creative side of things. And that's what the '07 strike was kind of about. But the WGA at the time, and I wasn't a member yet, did not know how to market that, which is silly because they're writers. They should know how to sell an idea. But again, some of the higher ups that were at WGA at the time didn't know how to do that properly. The most recent strike had a very different approach, but it still had some of the older generation saying the dumb stuff about greed, money, and all that stuff. It wasn't about that. It was really about cutting. It was about saving, technically, California, because California's economy is dependent on the film industry. And if you get rid of the creative aspect of the film industry, you're not making any movies, you're not making any television shows. If you're doing it with generative AI, and it's all going to be corporate stuff, the corporate stuff that audiences haven't been responding to, which is what we've been seeing for the past few years. If that's going to be the new Hollywood, the writers were fighting against that, because a lot of them were being pushed out because they were a little difficult to work with. When they said, we want to do a prequel to Willy Wonka. Well, you're going to have a lot of writers saying, okay, well, let's do that. And then you're going to have a lot more experienced writers saying, why? I've got an original story that could be just as whimsical and fun and magical as Willy Wonka. Why don't we do that, make a new IP, make new money? Marketing gets involved and says, well, that's a higher risk factor. People already know Willy Wonka, so we want to go with that. In which case, the derivative now becomes primary, and it hurts the rest of the industry. But they got very lucky with Willy Wonka, because that was, I guess, post-strike. That did really well at the box office for Warner Brothers. But it's the fact that you have the studio system and even the smaller production houses and studios just not wanting to take the risk anymore. And they have a complete misunderstanding of how things work. When they changed the TV model to the streaming model, our television shows, we got way more of them, but they also got really bad. And the good ones were harder to find because you got oversaturated with so much stuff that even if you find something that's good, it's hard for people to latch onto because they just don't have the time. They're spending more time scrolling through the streaming service like a Netflix or a Max or Disney Plus than they are watching the content that's on there.
Yeah. No, I can identify with that. There are times where it's like, oh, I just want to watch something before I go to bed. And then I'm scrolling through all these movies and I'm just kind of paralyzed. I don't know what to watch. Do I want to see this movie again, or do I want to try a movie that I've never seen again? And I just wind up going to bed and not watching anything.
And we had 600 new shows last year. That's a lot. That's more than we've ever had before. And on average, when I was starting out, on average, you get 100 new shows a year. 5 or 10% of those would make it to series. But now we're getting 600 new shows. A third of those are network and the rest are streaming, and they're already bought and paid for prior to release, which means they're not even tested. And then they tank and they cost way too much money. And the writer's strike, one of the aspects that I really never expected them to do was basically say, we don't want that prepaid system anymore. We want to do a pilot season. We want to pitch a pilot, get it tested, and earn it to be put to series or put to the first 13. And I'm like, I've never seen a union want to do that because it's slightly less guaranteed work, but it's there. And then they threw in the residual sections saying that,
the more succeeds, you succeed.
Yes. And it's like, well, that's a meritocracy stipulation, which means that anyone that can't write a show that could do well is not going to be getting hired. And that's going to spread faster than any other type of reputation you have there. Like, yes, the top 20% of writers are always working because they've earned that spot, and the bottom 80% struggle to get a job because they're networking and they're developing their skills. And then for the last decade, we've had people that didn't know how to write, but they've checked all these other boxes and they were thrown into the writer's room and they gave us garbage.
All right.
And
go ahead.
That was all the crazy stuff there. And I think that goes into the problem with Furiosa, is because we've been exposed to so much garbage that audiences are justified in being apprehensive over to what they want to watch, especially when they're seeing a framework of Furiosa that matches a lot of other frameworks that were terrible, that insulted audiences' intelligence and did not entertain and were more about preaching and whatnot. And I thought Furiosa was an interesting character from Fury Road, even though, I mean, I wasn't the biggest fan of the movie, but I dug it for what it was.
All right. So we're going to talk about an article that came out in the LA Times last week, and it's dealing directly with the writers. But I do want to talk about a few other things before that. But I have this theory about not only just Furiosa, but this trend toward female-led action movies or female-led movies. And the theory is that when you look at Furiosa and you compare it to a movie like back in the old days with Stallone and Schwarzenegger, and why those movies worked and why Furiosa didn't, or why the appeal wasn't there for audiences. And part of me feels like that the problem with a female protagonist is the fact that there are rules and limitations placed upon the way you present a female protagonist. For example, in Furiosa, there was an effort to keep Furiosa as virginal as possible throughout the film, in terms of don't touch her, don't violate her, and this was a part of that. And to me, it was you're thinking in your head, yeah, because if they did do something to her, you'd have feminist groups calling the show misogynist. You don't treat women like that, and that got me thinking that one of the problems with having female protagonists today is the fact that you can't go in certain directions with them, in terms of nudity, in terms of violence, that they are just forbidden things. And for me, as a comedian who performs family-friendly comedy on stage, I know full well the problems of placing limitations on creativity. The fact that I think we've gotten to a point where we're drawing lines, and as writers and creatives in the writers' room, you can't cross those lines. And for me, when you have a female protagonist, there are so many lines you can't cross that now you're creating stories that just don't feel challenging enough, or you don't feel like the stakes are high enough in movies that are led by females versus males. Because quite frankly, you could torture a man, you could torture male characters, you could do horrible things to them and get away with it in movies. You just can't do that with females. Do you feel like do you think my theory has any validity?
Partially, but there's one caveat to that, which is you can never really truly put restrictions on creativity, because creativity finds a way around them. That's the hallmark of creativity. I mean, look no further than All in the Family. There's a lot of things that they managed to get away with that otherwise you'd know if they'd said it directly, you wouldn't be able to get away with it.
Right, but could you do that today?
You can, if you're smart enough, and that's the problem. Right. Like, how many of the newer writers are actually going back to the history of film and television to understand how they managed to get away with those things, and how they were able to do it to the point where it appeased the people that are putting on those restrictions, because a lot of the people that are putting on those restrictions, their only agenda is that they just don't want to get phone calls from upset parents.
Yeah. Or they don't want Twitter to blow up.
Or something of that nature. Like, that's the only real reason why they do it. They otherwise don't care. They're just as dirty and filthy as the rest of us. But they put those on there as for two caveats. One, to cover their butts, and two, to see, okay, is this writer creative enough where if we want to do a torture scene with a woman, they can find another way, an allegorical way to do that. There are ways you can do it. I mean, look, one of the things I loved about the blaxploitation films is that Pam Grier, she got assaulted with unapologetically so, but she, her character came back and basically got her vengeance. Those are great films, and you can do it. The thing is, how do you do it to the point where it's not gratuitous, it's not exploitation? Because we had movies like I Spit on Your Grave had a scene so like that, and that was a revenge film. There was even another one. I was like 5 or 6 years ago. I think the woman who played Tomb Raider, I think that's how she got the role to play Tomb Raider. Is like she was like a side piece. Her character she was a side piece, and then they decided to leave her out in the middle of the woods or middle of the desert to let her die, and then she came back and killed the men that did all that stuff to her. The thing is that those are the types of stories that don't quite resonate overall with the audience that they're targeting, because I don't think they understand what audience they are targeting. They think, oh, a female-led movie is going to bring in the female audience. Well, no. It's still going to bring in the male audience, and you have to write with that in mind. And some of the times when they write it in that mind, they don't write the female character as a female character. They just write a masculine character and put the female veneer over top of it, and that is inauthentic, and it doesn't work. That's why, I mean, the most two famous female women we have is Ripley and Sarah Connor. The reason that they work is because they're mothers and they're doing stuff for their children. Like, that's the connection. That's how you justify it. That's the suspension of disbelief that you can make when you're
Yeah.
giving us a single woman, young, nothing. There's no stakes to them aside from their quote unquote virginity or purity, and that is not a personal connection. You have to do something stronger.
Yeah.
You have
Well,
to,
yeah. Well,
like,
let me challenge you on this point, because
cool, great.
you know, the point you're making is creatively you can work around it, and I would question what, you know, why do we need to work around it? But the other thing is, I feel like that it's not just from a creative standpoint, but it's from also the target audience standpoint. Is that maybe that's why men aren't seeing Furiosa versus Mad Max, is because there's a female protagonist, because there are limitations put on that female protagonist. Therefore, the action and the story is going to be limited, and to the point where men are just not the men who are, let's be real, the who are supposed to be the predominant audience for this, the ones shelling out the money, is that maybe that's the reason they're shying away from Furiosa, versus if you had put a you know, Mel Gibson as Mad Max in this movie.
Well, yeah. I mean, well, first of all, Mel Gibson and Mad Max, that brings in the nostalgia to the character, brings in a little bit more authenticity to the project, and it piques our interest. I think what hurts it is the fact that Furiosa isn't doesn't become an interesting character until this movie. So how she was presented in Fury Road didn't make me really want to see a movie about her. I want to see more about Imogen Joe. Like, give me
Mm-hmm.
that, right? I don't
Yeah.
I don't care about Furiosa and what her plight is and whatnot. There was something absent. It was hollow, and not to disrespect Charlize Theron, who did what she could, but it's just the substance wasn't really there. I didn't. You have to make me care about a character in order to watch that movie. One of the best examples recently that worked that way was T'Challa in Civil War. That guy, they made him very interesting. They gave him a very compassionate motivation, which is that someone killed his father in front of him and he was helpless to stop it. And so he wanted to find the person that is responsible and bring them to justice. And when he has the moment where he could possibly kill him, he decides, nope, I'm not going to kill you. You're going to actually be punished for your crime by the society. And then whatever fate they determine, that will be your fate. Whether it will be execution, whether it be imprisonment, that's his moral code coming through. And people were like, man, I want to see a movie about that guy. And then we got Black Panther. Now, it wasn't the best movie, but we got it, and people showed up to it because they were really fascinated and interested in that character.
Yeah.
That that level of intrigue, I don't think was presented in Furiosa with Fury Road. And then because we have a 10-year gap, it's like, oh, that character, really? Okay, well, maybe, no, I don't know. George Miller, cool. Is all the fun, the repetition of the Road Warrior just amped up like 1,000 times is essentially what Fury Road is, and I guess to a degree Furiosa. There's always the car chases. It's always about the cars, the chase, the crazy set pieces, which I think are fun for what they are. But what makes those things interesting is what's at stake, and we're losing stakes a lot in film as well.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you mentioned stakes. You know, Furiosa, she's a girl who's kidnapped, kind of you know, sent off into the world being kind of a concubine. She escapes, becomes this badass woman, takes down, exacts revenge on the death of her mother. You know, as good as that story may be, you know, I don't necessarily think that story is the thing that is going to appeal to the audience that the original Mad Max brought in, or the audience you wanted to bring in to make this a blockbuster, which is mostly men. It's, you know, and this is where we get canceled, and because we're talking about stories that appeal to men and stories that appeal to women. This movie felt like it was meant to appeal to both men and women, and therefore you lose. I think because you take that approach, you do lose that male audience, and I think we're seeing that here. That A, you're losing the male audience, and B, you're not really gaining the female audience in the end.
Well, where's the intrigue, right? So when you try to appeal to both the male and female demographic, you're playing into those angles. What's really fascinating is that when you play into one of those demographics, when you're bringing the other one in, they get to see a part of the world that they don't normally see. So, for instance, the drama, the passionate drama, or the romantic comedy, women like that. Guys don't always see those types of movies, but they will go with their girlfriends or wives to go watch them, and they get a taste of what that is, and it gives them insight into that world. Same thing with science fiction, action, crime, or thriller. That's not big on. I mean, except for the true crime stuff, women really love that. But you take a woman, to see that with girlfriend, wife, what have you, to see that, it brings them into their world. The only thing that really does appeal to both demographics is mystery, because you got Agatha Christie books, you've got Arthur Conan Doyle books. For some strange reason, mystery hits both demographics, but when it's controlled on a budget side of things, it always performs really well because you're focused on what's the mystery, the question, the intrigue. You're playing into curiosity, which is something that has been kind of sort of weeded out of us generation by generation. I'm finding even my godchildren, some of them, their friends are not curious about anything at all. Like, you pose them a question, like, I don't care. I mean, like, any question, it's like, hey, what's the weather like tomorrow? I don't care. Just, they don't want. I mean, and that's the other part too. Has us as an audience and us as a society failed ourselves by not trying to create or stimulate curiosity in the subsequent generations? And if there's no curiosity, then why do we want to go see a movie about Furiosa, a Mad Max story?
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing I tell my kid all the time. It's, aren't you curious about this? Don't you want to know how this is made? Don't you, and it's like, no, just want to watch my videos. Okay.